government whatsoever. If you cross into that area, good luck. And we had specific orders never to enter those areas as American forces. Here's another helicopter picture of the host province specifically. And I think it's appropriate today that we're here at a soil and water conservation meeting to talk about conservation and also water management. Terms growing up here in Allen County, I never really understood because they've been in practice for so many years. But to see in Afghanistan, where they have absolutely no water management training, any type of conservation backgrounds, you see irrigation is their only hope. Each farm, you can see kind of, in the lighting it's harder to see here, but in the northern areas of the province, there's very little irrigation. And each kalat, a kalat is one of these square type farms that each villager would have. And really, they don't even call them farms. They're just their homes that they have a small plot of land. The unit of measurement there is a jarab. Each farmer has about a typical size farm, and conversion would be about 1 acre to 2 acres per farm that they have. But each of their farmers is essentially a villager, and that's their only way of life. As I mentioned earlier, the helicopter is the primary mode of travel. This is one of my favorite photos we took. Of over 1,000 photos we took as a team. It was kind of hard to condense them down and pick out a few today to share with you. But here, this was an example where we as a team, you'll note the military members here, constructed a greenhouse for the Afghan people. And this was actually on one of our demonstration bases where Afghan villagers could come onto the base, see specific works in agriculture that we were developing for them, but also we would train university personnel within the Sheikh Zayed University, which is the equivalent of a Purdue University, the land-grant university in host province, would use this area and also a demonstration farm, which I'll show later, to really use that as a training ground and more of a train-the-trainer type of concept. The base that we specifically worked out of was Forward Operating Base Salerno. It's also known as Rocket City, a term I'll never forget. The first time I told my mother why we were called Rocket City was not a pleasant phone conversation. Located 7 kilometers from the Pakistani border, nearly weekly, we would encounter rocket attacks coming in and out onto the base, and it was just a way of life. I'd be out for a run on a Tuesday afternoon, and the air raid sirens would go off, and that meant take cover. And it's just something that is strange as that may seem, you get used to. And you take cover and stay in those barracks. But every once in a while, they do come into the barracks. Salerno is represented by all branches of the U.S. Armed Services, with, I'd say, 80% Army personnel taking up the majority of that base. There was a brigade based out of Salerno. Very, very high number of civilian contractors. A lot of the war in Afghanistan and now essentially all of Iraq is contractor focused. General Dynamics, Northrop Grumman, Blackwater, now known as Xenon, or some other type of companies. All of these contractors have large defense contracts. Rather than having uniformed personnel and more of a foreign relations effort, we're putting contractors on the ground. State Department and other civilians. A lot of third country nationals is what the term that the military would use. And I have some photos coming up of some great Ugandan men that I met on this mission. And the Ugandans were essentially mercenaries looking for work. These men would come, and Uganda is a trusted nation with the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, the NATO alliance that we have. And so Ugandans that have no work for themselves in their own country would sign up to be essentially babysitters of these Afghan nationals who would come onto the base to provide basic services for us. The Ugandans would walk around because the Ugandans were trusted and had security clearances. It was cheaper for the United States to pay the Ugandans to fly onto Forward Operating Base Salerno, watch over these Afghan citizens, and then fly them back to their country. Many of these Ugandan men, like Innocent, who I'll show, have spent 2 to 3 years away from their families just to find work in Afghanistan. And as I mentioned already, there are about 3,000 personnel on Salerno, a brigade-sized unit. Here is, once again, it's kind of hard in the light, hopefully you can see better than me here. Down in this portion is just kind of a picture of FOB Salerno. We call it the FOB, an acronym for Forward Operating Base Salerno, and we call that area the tent city. All of us lived in those type of buildings that you saw earlier in our team's agricultural development type building. The Salerno also housed 3 different types of helicopters: Black Hawk, Kiowa, and Apache attack helicopters. And as I mentioned earlier, with the frequent rockets that we have, it was very often you'd see these helicopters take off, and that was our immediate response, that they'd come in. But the helicopters were also the primary target of these rockets. So all of the mountains that you see there, a typical attack that would come into the base would come from these mountains. The men would come in through the night, and they're very creative. They put rockets on top of an ice block and have the charge, or whatever was going to ignite the fuse, resting between the rocket and an ice block. So when the morning sun would rise, that ice would melt, and the rocket would attach to the charge, and then it'd come onto the base. In the meantime, they'd be 3 to 4 hours away, and we'd never find them. Now, our mission specifically, because it was so focused in agriculture, and the Future Farmers of Afghanistan project especially drew a lot of national attention and worldwide attention. If those of you who have served before can see it all, the 4 stars on this gentleman's hat are a little higher than my lowly lieutenant bars. But while he came onto Forward Operating Base Salerno, this gentleman is Admiral Michael Mullen, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. At the time, he was President Obama's top military appointee. And he came on to learn specifically what we were doing in agriculture. He said, I've heard a lot about this project. How are you guys working with the schools? I've heard really good results. What's going on? So I had the honor of taking him around our farm and showing him that. And it just so happened, while he was on that mission, there was also a USO tour attached to it, where Purdue's own Bob Greasy was along as well. So the few Boilermakers on the team also had a chance to boiler up about 7,500 miles away from home, Mr. Greasy. Now, a lot of people have asked, what's it like to spend a year away from your families and everyone around the holidays? But the team really becomes a family. 64 people, I'd say, still today, I keep in close contact with at least 20. We all came together, the majority of them, as I said, all Army teammates who had known each other in the past. Myself entering the team, I didn't know one of them from Adam before we started training together. But constant reminders of home. The Indianapolis Colts here, this is on Christmas Day. You can see Private Cashin, he was the lowest ranking member, so he was our voluntold elf for the day. And I think we needed Don there, and his Santa Claus costume would have been the only other reminder of home. Better, but we had the Colts, and constant reminders of home that people would send care packages. And in the time that I was there, a little over 11 months, received over 110 care packages specifically addressed to me. And in our team, it was well over 1,000. It was just incredible to see the outpouring of support from all of you, our friends and family. Here's a photo, as I mentioned. Some of these rockets do find their way onto the base and actually into the building. This was at about 2 o'clock on a Tuesday afternoon. We were all out working on the farm and heard the incoming rockets, decided to take a gander around the base to see what that might have brought. And sure enough, we find this building, I believe it was building 1432, and that actually housed some of these Ugandan third country nationals. And in the photos that follow, you'll see these rockets. This is triple thick layer brick that these buildings are constructed out of. And you might wonder if anyone could survive from a rocket like that coming in. And tragic. Here you can see the gentleman who you'll see coming up soon was actually lying in bed watching a movie on his laptop when this rocket came in midday. And innocent Makatabu is here today because the good Lord spared his life. That rocket came in and failed to explode once it was in. And it was still sitting there, and of course the explosive ordnance disposal guys took the rocket, but he wouldn't be here with us today, sharing his great story. And in the meantime, got to know him very well because of that experience, and found out as a Ugandan, to see his respect for the United States would make all of you proud of your country because of the work we've done in Uganda, in different parts of Africa, and the iswd. He's pictured here with a picture of a book from President Bush. And in the time I got to know him, he explained to me the deep respect he had for our entire country, and worked out with some friends to get him an autographed copy from President Bush. And just different stories like that each day that change lives across the world in totally unexpected consequences here. Now to talk in depth a little bit more about the Future Farmers of Afghanistan project, I'm going to break it down into 5 phases. And once again, this project was really the brainchild of professional educators. Dr. Shane Robbins, Major Shane Robbins with Monroe Central Schools, and also Major Jeremy Dalton from Huntington North. And they really came up with this plan that said, let's start with the infrastructure, then let's break into the schools, then let's get into a mentorship piece. So at phase 1, we started working at Sheikh Zayed University. I mentioned, if you want to put it in known terms, think of Purdue University, the land-grant university. So let's start with the schools. And then in phase 2, we started a seminar program where the university officials at Sheikh Zayed worked with over 120 different high school educators in the communities in 6 different high schools. But everything was housed on campus there at the demonstration farm for this specific training focus. In phase 3, we installed kits at 6 different high schools throughout the province. These 6 were about 1/5 of the schools. There's currently 32 schools in Host Province. And these kits were chosen by the Director of Education. He said, these are schools, kind of shining stars, let's reward them and put an agricultural focus there. In phase 4, we have the mentorship program. And that is where these agricultural extension agents, just like we have extension agents here in Indiana, they had extension agents in each of the 13 districts. And these extension agents were the ones who really wanted to gain the knowledge from the university professors and to start working more and more on the site of the schools with every one of their villagers and the students. And finally, in phase 5, the agricultural fair and closure, one of those 6 schools, which happened to be Gargash High School, was chosen to host this agricultural fair and allow the students. There were actually no American forces present for this fair, and that was by design, so we could show the townspeople that these students had gained enough knowledge to host their own agricultural fair and bring it on. And they actually were out on the streets selling products that they had raised in their greenhouses from that. I think to the tune of about $500 they raised that day at the fair. $500 might not seem a lot, but remember their gross domestic product for the year is $575. So it made a difference in some of those students' lives and showed them the value of doing that. So here's a typical classroom, and this is the Bibi Halima Girls' School. They have school buildings, but if Afghans have one choice, it's to be outdoors. They love the sun, love to be out with that. And this is really a rare photo. I did not take this because in the Muslim culture, if any of you are aware, men do not associate with women unless it is their daughter or their wife. For me, even to ask a Muslim man about his wife or daughter would be rude. You do not mention a woman. Women are neither seen nor heard unless it's for purposes in the home, which then the man of the house would be the only one dealing with. So of the 7 women on our team, they were the only ones who could go into these women's or girls' schools that they could work with. So this is the Bibi Halima Girls' School. The site, actually in this realm, in this outdoor courtyard, is where we built our first project. Here's a solar dehydrator. Because the sun was out, I believe the statistic, if I'm correct, is about 330 days a year of sunshine in Afghanistan, most similar to New Mexico here in the United States. It was a beautiful climate where we were especially. And the solar dehydrator was especially effective in the women's projects because it was something that women could do in the privacy of their own village rather than coming out into the fields with that. So the men would a lot of times pick whatever products they were growing and in their greenhouses and then come back to the homes where the women would be in charge of